Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Burton. Yep, that's good. I'm the Product Management Director for Ipanema Technologies. And in fact, what I'm going to talk about today is more of an approach to WAN governance than the product specifically. WAN governance, I'll introduce it to you in case you're not familiar with it, and we'll look at how WAN governance can help you better operate your wide area network to deliver the services that you want to deliver. And of course, that is what the service offering is that we give to the partners that we work with. And Britannic make that available to you through the Net Manager product, in fact. So I'll move on. I thought I'd better start by explaining a little bit about what I mean when I talk about WAN governance. So back to basics a little bit, admittedly, but what is governance? Well, as you know, when I started writing the presentation, so I went to where everybody goes, I went to Wikipedia. This is what Wikipedia says about governance. Governance relates to the decisions that define expectations, grant power or verify performance. It consists either of separate processes or of specific parts of management or leadership processes. Sometimes people set up a government to administer these processes and systems. So really, it is what it says it is. But I like this definition because it lays out the key concepts of defining expectations, granting power and verifying performance as aspects of governance. So, okay, second question, where does it come from? Well, funnily enough, governance, certainly from the city or state perspective, has been around for an awfully long time. And indeed, in Western philosophy, Socrates and Plato were great thinkers in the area of governance. Plato having coined the phrase politeia, meaning city-state governance, in his Socratic dialogue, as it says on the slide, written in 380 BC. But in fact, it also crops up a lot in other philosophical cultures. So we can see people like Confucius came up with the concept of governance. Several of the Indian philosophers have also been involved in the definition of governance. Modern governance, however, goes back to about the 17th century, where John Locke wrote a treatise on contract and commercial governance, and he actually established the idea of having a contract between two parties to define what it is that is going to be delivered between them, and that is where modern corporate governance actually stems from. My job is fun. Now, why do we need governance? You may recognise some of the events on this slide. The Wall Street crash was caused by a lack of governance. The South Seas bubble many years ago was caused by a lack of governance. Mr. Madoff over there on the corner, he got away with it because nobody was applying governance procedures to his investment schemes. And indeed, in a slightly different area, here we can see a nice overhead of the Buncefield oil terminal, which blew up spectacularly a few years ago. And that failure was caused by a lack of governance and a lack of application of the defined governance principles to the security of the site. I picked that one because I live near there and it woke me up when it went crack. So governance really is important, and IT governance is in fact an established discipline. We can drill a little bit into the structure of an organisation using governance principles. And in fact, the IT Governance Institute defines governance as an integral part of enterprise governance that consists of the leadership and organisational structures and processes to ensure that the organisation's IT sustains and extends the organisation's strategies and objectives. So it directly relates the business objectives of the organisation you work for to the objectives of the IT department. And of course, there are several different mechanisms for applying that. People are maybe familiar at a technical level with things such as ITIL, which enforces a level of governance on the way you operate your business, but also COBIT as a standard-based approach to IT governance. Drilling down even further into the organisation, we get down to wide area network governance, WAN governance. And I really see WAN governance as a subset of IT governance, which is taking those statements I've just made about IT governance and applying them to the wide area network. IT governance is a subset of corporate governance. Corporate governance falls under the remit of the state where the organisation operates. So governance is in fact a cascading tree from the top right the way down to the bottom of a society, in fact. It shares all of the same goals as the IT governance, in fact, but applies them in a network, in a mechanism applicable to the wide area network. So it's about aligning the strategy with the IT strategy to support the IT strategy. The IT strategy supports the business strategy. It's about cascading those strategy and objectives down into the network, putting in place the organisational and procedural structures that you require to be able to deliver a wide area network that supports the IT, that supports the business, and putting in place the right control frameworks and then measuring the performance of the procedures that are in place to ensure that every aspect of the wide area network is delivering the value to the IT that the IT can use to deliver the value to the business. Now if we look into a little bit more of an example-based approach, what keeps you up at night is a standard question to ask network managers. The first one is knowing what's going on the network, typically. There were always problems understanding what's going on the network. I've been doing my job with Ipanema now for 8 years and in the industry for nearly 25. I know I don't look like it. Okay. And I've only ever met one customer who actually told me everything he had on his network and was right, which is a strange thing. I've seriously only met one organisation in all of that time who knew exactly what they had on their network. Even if you go and talk to telcos, they don't know. They know less than we know. It's quite strange, really. There we are. How do you deliver your business applications? If you don't know what's going on, actually delivering the service that you're contracted to deliver to the business is quite tricky because you don't know what might impact the delivery of that service. And finally, of course, how do you actually get the most for your money? How do you cost optimize your wide area network? I know that the price of bandwidth is reducing. Gartner says we're in a race to the bottom when it comes to bandwidth cost. Who can get there to actually provide it for less than it costs them to put the wires in the ground? That's where we're going. But buying bandwidth is not the same as buying performance or guaranteeing that the applications the business needs are going to work. So cost optimization is an important aspect of wide area network governance. Don't buy things you don't need. Buy the right things and use them in the right way to get the services that you require. Governance, any governance, but here particularly wide area governance, is actually a closed loop process, and it's a closed loop process that takes place over some time. The first step of this process is to set the objectives, to understand what it is that you want to achieve from the aspect of governance. Then we compare where we are now with those objectives. We decide on how we want to correct the situation, so we need to understand what's actually going on to take some corrective actions. We then implement those corrective actions and we compare the corrections with the original objectives. Now you might think that you then go back to deciding on some more corrections, but in fact it's always important to go back to reviewing the objectives. Objectives will change over time, and you should always approach any governance project with the attitude that you will need to refine your objectives as well as the way that you deliver those objectives to the business. So this is an entire closed loop of definition, identification of trouble areas, resolution, and then going back round to understanding and making sure the objectives are correctly set still. If we look at the specifics of WAN governance as opposed to general governance, I've broken that down into 5 topics. The first one is understanding what's going on the network. The second one is using technology to improve the services. So once I know what's going on and I can identify some problems, I can use technology to correct those problems. Then we have performance management, which is understanding overall whether I'm delivering the benefit, the services that the business requires. And then there are a couple of procedural aspects associated with network operations and how network operations works within a WAN governance framework, and of course cost and savings control. And I'll drill in and explain a little bit about each one as we go forwards. So, what challenges do businesses face? Well, typically there are a diverse mix of applications in most organisations, and many of these applications make it very difficult to understand what's going on in the network. Voice and video, as any-to-any traffic flows, actually make it quite a challenge not only to guarantee application performance for other applications, but to actually see all of the traffic flowing around the network. It's no longer enough to stick a probe into a data center and hope we're going to catch everything, because a phone call between two branches won't be seen. So we have to take a holistic view of the network. But we still have to manage the standard applications, ERP, email, intranet, extranet applications, people who want to watch the royal wedding when they should be working, that kind of thing. These are all business uses, well, not all of them are business uses, but they're all uses of the network. And these are all things that we need to be able to manage in order to deliver the service we want to deliver. Networking itself is quite complex. MPLS, as a networking technology, is not too difficult in that it lets you talk between any locations in your VPN. But when you add in things like the fact that a lot of services are now hosted in the internet or in hosting centers, that people maybe have remote locations that are connected via different access mechanisms, such as VSAT, then you can get into very complex networking deployments and scenarios where traffic management really is extremely important, and where WAN governance really is the approach to take to deliver the benefit of the key applications working whenever. So, we did a survey of about 48 of our top customers, covering about 10,000 sites in their wide area networks. And we asked them a few questions. I'll drill into the results now. The first question we asked them was, in your network, how many different applications do you separately identify? And the average answer is 69. Some had over 100, some had 5 or 6, frankly, but the average answer is 69. People want to be able to control around 70 applications. Some of them because they want to ensure that they get service from the network. Some of them because they want to ensure that they don't impact the service being delivered to other applications. But 69, that's a large number of applications. I've talked to organisations that will tell me that they have 200 or 300 critical business applications. I think they maybe misunderstand what critical means if they say that, but certainly 200 or 300 applications in a medium-sized enterprise that's been around for a few years is an extremely believable number. The question is, do you need to manage them all separately or not? So we can group these applications, and we can group them into, again, asking the question to the customer base, about 15, what we call user classes, but groups of applications. And a group of applications in this case is a set of applications with a similar business importance, with a similar behaviour over the network. So it could be my key intranet applications, or it could be my voice over IP telephony, which I need to treat in the same way wherever it occurs within the network. Again, you see some people go to what I might describe as the nth degree and have probably a classification per application that they've defined. Some group very tightly together and only have a few classifications of like applications. Now, perhaps the most surprising statistic is once we drill into that, we ask the question, how much of your traffic is actually critical business traffic? And the answer is frankly shocking. It's about 3% for most of these organisations. So they're buying a massive network and only 3% of the traffic is considered to be business critical. The interesting fact here is if we look at the blue bars, they're showing me the distribution of numbers of applications within each of the defined business criticalities. We can see that's fairly flat. In fact, they have the same number of top criticality applications as they have high, medium or low criticality applications. But the majority of the traffic on the network is actually in what is deemed to be a low criticality application. Now, when we talk about business criticality, we probably need to define a little bit about what sorts of applications we're going to put into those criticalities. So we might consider top criticality applications to be voice, Citrix, ERP, things like that. Low criticality applications would be things that are not time sensitive, such as email, file transfers, antivirus updates, the sort of thing that must always take place on the network, but where it doesn't need instantaneous access to resources in order to be considered to be giving acceptable performance. So for me, I actually am very, very surprised that it's only 3% of network traffic that is really, really critical to most organisations. Again, this is an average across 48 customers. I'm not saying that if you've got more than 3%, you're not doing your networking right. We've worked with organisations who have 10-15% of critical business traffic. It very much depends on the mix of applications and the type of business you're in. If we look now about traffic control, using technology is a key aspect of delivering WAN governance, and the technology really gives you visibility, control and optimization of networking traffic. So optimization is applying acceleration technologies. It's about not sending information if it's already been transmitted across the network. It's about understanding how application protocols work and optimizing them to deliver a better user performance. For example, to overcome the challenges of a network that has high latency. When you're using Microsoft applications, that's a bit of a killer. So you'd use a protocol accelerator to get around that problem. Traffic control is extremely important because a lot of traffic is quite time sensitive. And traffic control really is applying air traffic control to your network, if you like. You're very much making sure that you're not transmitting data into the network if it's not going to be received at the other end. There's no point in sending reams of data into your network only for the telco to decide there's no capacity at the remote end and throw it away. It's better not to send it than to send it, pay for it and have it thrown away. So traffic control is a very important aspect of optimizing your network to deliver business wide area network governance, for the simple reason that if I can guarantee that the critical applications are getting the access to the resources and that traffic is going to arrive, I can guarantee the performance of the key business applications. Here we can see, I've taken an example from one of our customers who kindly let me use their information. We can see a weekly report here which shows me that the volume of data across this particular customer environment changes on a daily basis. No 2 days are the same. We can see they're less busy at the weekend, as indeed most of us are, and they're more busy in the middle of the week. But the traffic profile is very variable. The quality that they experience, however, is fairly consistent across the network if you look at the quality graph. And down here at the bottom, the wiggly blue line is just showing me 2 daily traffic profiles, just to make the point that the actual traffic profile throughout the hours of the day is different, as well as over the period of days in the week. So being able to control in these periods of activity or inactivity is really quite a key aspect of wide area network governance. Now as we look at reporting, one of the key aspects I said at the start is the ability to understand whether or not you're meeting your objectives. And the way that we do that within wide area network governance is to use KPIs and metrics, of course. Now there are a lot of technical metrics in networking we can use, like delays, loss, jitter, throughput, all these wonderful things. But when it comes down to determining if an application works or not, they are inputs to understanding the performance, but they are not indicators of the performance itself. So we use standard indicators, such as mean opinion score for the voice over IP environment, and application quality score for my data applications. And this takes those technical metrics and converts them into a mark out of 5 for mean opinion score and a mark out of 10 for application quality score, to say whether or not the application is meeting the objectives that have been defined for it. It's therefore very easy to show a management report that lets me see easily whether or not my wide area network is delivering service where it needs to deliver it. Are the applications getting 9 out of 10? Are they getting 4 out of 10? If they're getting 4 out of 10, then I know I need to put people onto the problem and start investigating what's going on to improve the performance. We can also represent that in real time in red, amber, green indicators, so that the guys that are actually running the network can see dynamically where problems are occurring and can be getting involved with making sure that those issues are managed for you. That really drives the move from what I might call standard network management, where I'm defining network policies, classes of service on the routers, that kind of thing, and manually adapting those policies, my traffic shaping rules and what have you, to reactively fix problems after they've occurred in the network, towards actually being in a position of governance where I'm working to application performance objectives which are defined at the high level, at the business level, which adapt automatically to take into account changes in the networking environment, and therefore proactively to drive the delivery of good service across the network. That's a real mindset shift from reacting to problems to planning an environment where the problems are automatically managed out. Again, looking at a specific report from the customer, we can pick out a couple of interesting things on this, and I'm looking at an application quality report here. This is a customer in the health area. It's the World Health Authority, in fact, and they have a lot of remote locations, as you might imagine from the work that they do, mainly connected via satellite, so they have a lot of the challenges that I described at the start, which is why I picked them as an example customer. We can see here, overall, the performance of their sites is pretty good. The site application quality score is pretty high. It's 8s and 9s, which for the type of network they run is really very good. However, in this location you may be familiar with called Kabul, the performance is less good. And we can drill in on the next page to see how we manage that. And that is probably because every time they erect a satellite, somebody blows it up. Not good for application performance. Okay. If we drill into the detail of Kabul, here specifically focused on the ERP application, we can see that despite the fact that the performance at the site overall was very poor, the performance of the key application, the application that enables them to deliver the vaccines, the medicines and so on to where they're required, is actually not bad at all. It's 8.3 out of 10, 8.4 out of 10. And this is because the system they're using, the Ipanema system, is actually protecting that key application. So despite the vagaries of the bandwidth that's available there, what is available is being used to support the most important aspects of the business. They're really grabbing hold of WAN governance as a discipline and saying, I don't care what happens in the network, this application must always work, and I want to put in place the tools to make sure that that happens. Now, there are different ways of achieving this. There are 3 models. There's a do-it-yourself model where you put in the tools and the processes required and you run them yourselves. You are responsible for defining how you want to report upon it, understanding the reports, presenting the information to management and so on. There are co-managed systems where you can involve a partner who will deploy it for you, will work with you on a consultancy basis. And indeed you can even go right the way down to a fully managed system where the partner actually gives you the report at the end of the day and you have little to do on a day-to-day basis with WAN governance apart from accept or not the recommendations that come out on a periodic basis from the partner's analysis of the information the system gathers. And of course, as with any technology, there are a million different ways of delivering it. It can be centralized or distributed. Integrate it into other business processes, or it can be a silo on its own, and so on and so on. That really depends on how it fits best within the organisational structure that already exists that you want to apply it to. Now, I've worked in the industry, as I said, for a little bit too long, and in fact, one of the things that I know about networking is whenever something goes wrong in my business, even if it's the boss getting a puncture, the people that get blamed are the network people. Generally speaking, it's always the network that you point the finger at first because that's the hardest place to prove that the problem doesn't exist, typically, in a traditional environment. That's certainly the case. So we find a lot of networking people spend 80% of their time proving that they haven't got something wrong. That's not an effective use of resources. And it's pretty unfair on the people who are constantly getting run up because the SAP upgrade failed when it's got nothing to do with them, right? So putting in place WAN governance is a mechanism for making people feel more valued. You have the tools in place to automatically, not only to ensure that networking problems are managed out of the environment because of the dynamic nature of the Ipanema system, but also to avoid that unfair finger pointing. It's very easy to get hold of a report that actually says, well, I think you'll find that the application performance across the network is perfectly fine. If your response time is 25 seconds, maybe there's a database problem that you need to be investigating or something like that. That level of detail exists. So the drill down from a high-level KPI, my application's got 9 out of 10, to some low-level technical metrics when it's still not working, to say that, in fact, the server response time is far too great. Maybe we need to talk to the IT team about this problem. It's a very, very quick thing to do. So you're moving away from having demoralised networking staff to having people who are planning for the future, managing upgrades, preparing voice over IP deployments, and all the things they thought they were going to do when they went into networking. A little screenshot just to show the idea of red, amber, green. Here we can see an application performance view. So I can very easily see, and again this is from my favourite live customer, we can easily see applications that are working well, applications that are not working well. And over here we've got a site-based view, and we can see that they have several sites where performance is unacceptable or deemed to be unacceptable against the objectives. But as I say, they know very easily whether that's a problem or not because they have the application performance information to back it up, and they also have the understanding of where they sit within the network and whether or not there's a service outage and so on. So this is all linked together with the overall service delivery. Now, cloud computing is a new challenge that we all face. And if you Google cloud computing, you can find 1,001 different definitions of what it is. I'm still a little bit in the old school of thinking it's a posh name for hosting, but I'm sure my opinion will change ultimately when somebody proves me wrong. However, whatever you want to call it, we'll call it cloud computing. It simplifies the delivery of IT services. We're in the centralisation cycle. We might be centralising on our site, or we might be centralising in somebody else's location, or we might be buying a centralised service or an application like Salesforce from a third party. They're all examples of cloud computing. They simplify the IT process. Of course, they also put much more load on the wide area network and make it a much more business critical application, because if I'm using Salesforce, I don't know where the servers are. I must have my internet access available to me. If I'm hosting my applications in a third-party data center, that part of the VPN is vital to the business. I must be able to guarantee that it delivers the service all the time that the business requires. Otherwise, I lose all of the benefits of the centralization project. So cloud is very, very good for networking because it continues to drive the value into the network. And in fact, it's detracting value from an in-house IT team to a certain extent, but it's pushing it into the network itself. Cloud computing has come along very rapidly, really, as a concept. Here's a little example of legacy. That's where I started, unfortunately, one of those. Through distributed computing down to where we are at the moment, which is laptops and smartphones and everybody expecting to be able to access anything from anywhere, and ultimately moving on, I think, to where you won't have a PC on your desk or anything like that. I'm a big advocate of having something that looks a bit like an iPhone but is a bit bigger and a bit more usable and has a better battery, and using that as my business resource wherever I am, whether I'm in my office, on the train, whatever. And that for me is where the benefit of cloud computing comes from. The shift is extremely rapid, and Gartner has cloud as one of its very, very important topics to watch. Now, as I said, you can have various different flavors of cloud. You can have public cloud, where my applications are hosted somewhere that is not under my control. Could be in the internet, could be in a third-party data center. We can have private cloud, which is a posh word for my data center, frankly, but it is a private cloud. Network is just a cloud. And of course, most organizations will have a mix of both. They will retain their key asset in-house, but they may well distribute things like the delivery of exchange services to a third-party operator, so they don't have to worry about the pain of delivering that particular service. That means that the way that you use the network must fundamentally change, and the way that you look at delivering services outside of the typical VPN environment needs to start becoming standardized with the way that you deliver services within that VPN environment. So we must extend the reach of WAN governance to take into account cloud computing. Server virtualization is in fact a big driver for the whole thing, and the ability to run multiple different applications on the same physical hardware is extremely appealing. As it says here, a standard server is typically only used about 20% of its capacity. So we could run 4 different applications on that server. The maths doesn't stack up quite like that, but the principle is sound. We could run more applications on the hardware using virtualization technology. And pushing this into third-party data centers brings us to savings of heating, power, lighting, and so on. And the challenge that we face is very much one of ensuring that the branch office does not get swamped with the different directions of data information. Here we can see the branch office actually has now become the hub within the network. It's communicating with multiple different data sources. Could be in-house data centers, could be hosted data centers, could be applications on the internet. So the congestion point is very clearly at the branch site. We need to manage all of our application performance no longer in the data center, but at the branch level, in order to guarantee that regardless of where the application lives the user is trying to access, they will always get the service that they require. In this model, we're using a centralized internet gateway breakout, but it's equally applicable if you have a local internet gateway breakout in the site itself, or if you have a backup internet circuit for disaster recovery, for example. So WAN governance really needs to be extended, the footprint needs to be pushed out not only into the VPN, but across those internet-based resources as well. Some of the key applications, certainly that we use as an organisation, reside within the cloud. The ability to understand the performance and manage and guarantee the service is very, very critical. As we can see from the animated circle. So just to summarise, I put together a short checklist of things to consider when you look at rolling out a WAN governance project. I won't read them because I'm pretty sure the slides will be available afterwards. But I've broken them down into the 4 key areas to consider and some key questions that I think it makes sense to look at if you want to run a WAN governance project. That's it from me.